The news that the performing arts troupe was coming to put on a variety show spread through the entire regiment within minutes. I was still asleep when Maya shook me so hard I drifted in and out, groggy and half awake. "Quit sleeping, Alina," she said, her voice a sharp intrusion into the last vestiges of my peace. "Weren't you going on day after day about seeing Julian perform? He's finally coming. Hurry up and deliver that gift you've had ready since forever." "What performance? What gift? Didn't I already die after they couldn't save me?" My head, a chaotic archive of a life already lived, brimmed with the memories. The sterile smell of the sanitarium, the relentless beep of the heart monitor slowing, the crushing loneliness of a deathbed with no one to hold my hand. The moment I opened my eyes, I saw the commemoration banner hanging directly opposite my headboard, the words 35th Regiment clearly printed on it. The coarse texture of my standard issue blanket was under my fingers. The sound of scattered youthful voices out in the corridor only confirmed the impossible, wonderful, terrifying truth. I had been reborn. Maya laughed and tossed me a warm, damp towel. "You're so thrilled Julian's coming you've gone silly. Still, I've got to hand it to you. He's been lukewarm toward you for so long and you can still stick it out. If it were me, I would have cut and run ages ago." I clenched the hot towel, the heat a stark contrast to the cold finality of my memories. I kept my head down and said nothing. The suffocating agony from my death in my last life hadn't faded. It was a fresh wound on a soul that had already bled out. In my ears I could still hear Julian, his face contorted with a hatred I never understood, jabbing a finger at my nose and shouting that I was the third party, the interloper in his great romance with Clara. The scene of him and his daughter, my daughter, happily laughing with Clara was still vivid, a beautiful family portrait from which I was always excluded. That's how it was. Did I really want the tragedy to replay in this life? Was I such a glutton for punishment? I slowly scrubbed my face, the rough cotton of the towel grounding me in this new reality. I hung it back up on its designated hook with a precision that felt military final. Then I slid back under the covers and turned my face to the wall. "I'm not going," I said, my voice muffled but clear. "You all go watch. And there's nothing between Julian and me. Don't talk about me and him anymore. It reflects poorly on everyone." The dormitory fell silent. Maya and a few other comrades froze, their chatter dying mid-sentence. I could feel their stunned gazes on my back. It was as if I'd just announced I was defecting to the moon. "Alina, what got into you?" Maya finally breathed, her voice laced with disbelief. "This is Julian. The guy you pined for day and night. You've chased him for so long and you even bought him those imported chocolates. Don't think we don't know. What is this? A new tactic? Playing hard to get." They joked until they were doubled over with laughter. I couldn't blame them for not believing me. My chasing after Julian had been almost common knowledge, a regiment-wide spectacle. I'd done a whole basket of foolish, desperate things, each one cementing my reputation as a hopelessly lovesick fool. At this point, if I told them I could gnaw through a whole cow raw, that would probably sound more believable than my sudden indifference. I didn't argue. There was no point. Actions would speak louder than words ever could. I slid out of bed, my body younger, more agile than I remembered. I walked to my personal cabinet, the small, lockable space that held my few treasures. There, tucked behind neatly folded clothes, was the box of chocolates. Expensive, imported, obtained through a favor I'd called in. I took it out, the colorful wrapper feeling cheap and foolish in my hands. I tore it off. "I really am not going," I repeated, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I must have caught a draft last night. I woke up with a pounding headache. Please tell the captain for me." I held out the open box, the rich, dark candies gleaming under the dorm lights. "And take these. Share them among yourselves." One of the girls, a quiet one named Sarah, accepted the box I handed over. Her eyes went wide. "Wait, you're not saving these for Julian? Why would I give them to him?" I asked, the question genuine. "I already said there's nothing between us." In my last life, because Julian had casually mentioned he envied a teammate in their troop who had imported candy, I had immediately pulled strings and spent a small fortune to get him the most popular brand from overseas. I'd presented it to him with a heart full of hope, only to turn a corner later and see the whole box in Clara's hands. When she spotted me, she had the gall to look smug. "Oh, this," she'd said, her voice a saccharine simper. "I told Julian I get a little low on blood sugar and he just gave it to me. He's so thoughtful. If in this life I still threw myself at him knowing exactly how it would end, then I really would be out of my mind. Seeing how firm I was, my roommates didn't push it. They shared a few confused looks, pocketed the chocolates and said their goodbyes, heading to the auditorium together to watch the performance, their whispers trailing behind them like confused ghosts. It was a rare day off without training. Once they were gone, the silence in the dorm was a balm. I tidied my area, the simple, methodical act of folding and arranging a meditation. I then planned to go out for a stroll, picking up some medicine on the way back as a show for my supposed illness. I wandered around the whole day, reacquainting myself with a world I had lost. The smell of damp earth after a brief rain, the vibrant green of the trees, the simple joy of breathing air that wasn't filtered through a hospital ventilator. It was all so painfully, beautifully alive. As the sky began to darken, painting the barracks in hues of orange and purple, I figured the show must be over and started back. I walked slowly, savoring my freedom, my solitude. I didn't expect the world to be this small. I ran right into them. The performance finished. Julian was pushing his bicycle as he walked Clara back to her dorm. I stood at a corner, half hidden in the growing shadows, and watched them walk side by side. Even with a careful half-meter between them, the intimacy was obvious to any fool. The way their shoulders occasionally brushed, the tilt of his head as he listened to her, the soft laughter she offered him. I tugged at the corner of my mouth and sneered inside. How blind had I been in my last life? How pathetically, stubbornly clingy. The scene of lying all alone in the sanitarium at the very end surfaced again, a cold wave washing over me. That suffocating pressure clamped hard around my throat, a phantom pain from a death not yet distant enough. Forget it. Out of sight, out of mind. I turned to slip away, to leave them to their budding romance, but a slanting gust of wind hit, rattling a nearby iron sign. It clanged loudly, a jarring metallic sound that seemed to tip them off. Drawn by the noise, both of them looked over. Clara turned her head and spotted me at once. The instant Julian saw me, his expression suddenly froze, a deer caught in the headlights of my dispassionate gaze. His fingers tightened unconsciously on the handlebars. His voice, when he finally managed to speak, was trembling as he stammered, "Alina." His eyes kept darting away from mine, unable to hold my gaze. After struggling for a long time, he still couldn't string together a full sentence. I understood exactly what he was afraid of. Julian was an orphan, and without my family's quiet, unwavering support, he would never have been able to keep pursuing his dream and eventually join the performing arts troupe. He was scared I'd use his closeness to Clara as an excuse to cut him off, to strip away everything he relied on. The money, the connections, the safety net. But he had no idea. That's not the kind of person I am, and my parents would never do such a thing either. Our support had never been a leash, but he had always seen it as one. Clara suddenly stepped forward, a study in performative protectiveness. She tugged on Julian's sleeve, pulling him behind her as if he were a damsel and I the dragon. She glared at me wearily, her whole posture screaming that I was the villain trying to break up a couple. In my last life I had indeed done something that stupid. The first time I caught the two of them together, I had stormed over with red eyes, ready to demand answers, my heart shattered into a million pieces. But before I could even get a word out, Clara burst into tears on the spot, looking so pitiful and victimized that I was cast as the bully before I'd even spoken. I didn't have the time or energy for that now. Their drama was a play I'd already seen, and I had no desire for a repeat performance. "Nothing, just passing by," I said, my voice flat. I waved a hand in a gesture of dismissal and turned to leave. But Julian suddenly called after me, his voice laced with a fresh wave of panic. "Alina, don't misunderstand. Clara and I were just heading the same way." "No need to explain," I cut him off, glancing back briefly. I made sure my eyes were as empty as I felt. "You can walk with whoever you want. It has nothing to do with me." Clara frowned, her pretty features pinching in confusion and irritation. "What do you mean by that?" "The literal meaning." I tugged at the corner of my mouth in a humorless half-smile, then fixed my gaze back on Julian. "Julian, don't worry. From now on, I won't pester you anymore, and I won't say a word about you to my parents. Whoever you want to be with, that's your choice." I let my words hang in the cool evening air, a final, definitive period at the end of a sentence that had run on for a lifetime too long. From here on, I said, my voice clear and steady. Your bridge is your bridge. My road is my road. Julian froze, his lips moving as if to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at me, a profound confusion in his eyes, as if I were a book whose text had suddenly rearranged itself into a language he couldn't read. I didn't care about their reactions. I turned and walked away. The wind blew across my face and I slowly exhaled a long breath, a breath I felt I'd been holding for 40 years. At least this time I had ended everything before any tragedy could happen. When I returned to the dorm, Maya and the others were crowded around my box of chocolates, happily devouring the expensive treats. The moment I stepped in, the air was thick with the scent of cocoa and their conspiratorial giggles. Sarah sidled up to me, her mouth smeared with a hint of chocolate, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Alina, I heard you ran into Julian. Why didn't you talk to him more? He looked like he wanted to say something. I grabbed a piece of chocolate from the nearly empty box and popped it into my mouth. The flavor was rich and complex, a far better use of the candy than gathering dust as an ungiven gift or worse, ending up in Clara's hands. What's there to talk about? I said, swallowing the sweet evidence of my liberation. Don't bring him up again. The room fell into a stunned silence. The only sound was the distant call of a drill sergeant from the training grounds. What? Maya finally managed, her voice a whisper. Alina, are you serious? She reached over and touched my forehead, her fingers cool against my skin. No fever. Then why are you talking nonsense? I slapped her hand away, but a genuine smile touched my lips for the first time since my awakening. Of course I'm serious. I figured it out. He doesn't like me, so why should I force it? There are plenty of men in the world. I looked at each of their bewildered faces. I'll find someone who truly shares my heart. Someone worth giving everything to. For a few seconds the dorm was dead quiet. Then, as if a dam had broken, the room erupted into cheers and a flurry of movement. Finally. About time. Maya shouted, clapping her hands together. Sarah, eager to please, hurried to bring me a cup of hot water. Alina, you don't even know. We've been sick of watching this for a long time. Julian never really cared about you. Just the other day I even saw him hand the handkerchief you gave him straight to Clara to wipe her sweat. I chewed another piece of chocolate calmly, not a ripple stirring in the placid lake of my heart. In my past life, a revelation like that would have left me fuming half the night, crying into my pillow, dissecting every word and gesture for a shred of hope. But now all I could think was, what the hell does that have to do with me? The shift was tectonic. The part of me that had been defined by Julian was simply gone, leaving behind a quiet, determined emptiness ready to be filled with anything else. Oh right, Alina, Maya suddenly piped up, her mouth full. I heard the college entrance exam is about to be reinstated. Do you have any plans? The question hit me like a physical blow. The exam. I had forgotten about that pivotal moment. In my last life, I had been so consumed by Julian that the news had been nothing more than background noise. My aspirations had begun and ended with him. Now the news was truly encouraging, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. But my newfound clarity brought another thought. Did my aspirations lie there? I wanted to stay rooted. Rooted at the grassroots level, rooted at the border. This regiment, with all its hardships and simplicity, felt more like home than the lonely, gilded cage of my marriage had ever been. So I shook my head. I haven't decided yet, I said, which was the truth. But honestly, I'd really like to stay here, serving as a soldier of the people. Maya patted my shoulder, her expression turning serious and supportive. Whatever you choose, it's fine. Just being able to let go of Julian is already the biggest step forward. The rest, I'm not worried about you at all. I smiled without replying. Her faith was touching. After all, I had been given another chance at life. Only a fool would keep rolling around in the same muddy pit. But just as I had thrown myself into training, finding solace in the burn of muscles and the sharp clarity of orders, a notice came down from the regiment. Everyone was required to join a mountain climbing exercise. And the performing arts troupe, of course, would be coming along too. I stared at the notice pinned to the bulletin board, my heart sinking into a deep, cold well of resistance. A whole day. Trapped on a mountain with Julian and Clara. The very thought sent a shiver of revulsion down my spine. But as a squad leader I couldn't back out, and I couldn't keep faking illness either. My sudden, miraculous recovery from my cold was already noted. I had no choice but to grit my teeth and go. On the day of the climb, the performers all showed up in their neat military uniforms, their voices carrying from a distance a cloud of youthful energy and artistic flair. I kept my head down, adjusting the straps of my pack, determined to have nothing to do with them. "Isn't that squad leader Alina?" a voice chirped from far too close. Clara appeared out of nowhere, giving me a sidelong glance filled with pure, unadulterated disdain. "Didn't you say you'd given up on Julian? Then why are you here?" I didn't even bother giving her a look. I focused on the weight of my pack, the feel of the rough straps in my hands. Her words were gnats buzzing around my head, annoying but harmless. In the regiment, my physical training results had always been among the best, and this kind of climb was nothing for me. I charged forward, my legs pumping, my breath even. I pushed myself not out of competition but out of a desperate need for distance. Before long, I'd left them so far behind that they weren't even in sight, their voices swallowed by the dense forest. At a pavilion halfway up the mountain, I stopped to rest and sip some water, the silence a blessed relief. The view was breathtaking, a rolling sea of green hills under a vast blue sky. This was life. This was freedom. "Alina, wait up." The voice, slightly breathless, shattered my peace. Turning, I saw Julian scrambling up the path, using both his hands and feet in his hurry. By the time he reached me, he was bent over with his hands on his knees, panting heavily, his face flushed with exertion. What was he doing here? Shouldn't he be spending this time cozying up to Clara, using my absence to strengthen their bond away from prying eyes? I screwed the cap back on my canteen with a definitive click. He straightened up, still trying to catch his breath. "You walked so fast. Are you still mad at me?" he asked between gasps. "Honestly, it's nothing. I just wanted to tell you there's really nothing between Clara and me that day." "Enough." I raised my hand to cut him off, the gesture sharp, final. "I already told you. Whoever you want to be with, that's your business. You don't need to report back to me." In his anxiety, he stepped forward, but his foot landed on a broken, moss-covered slab of stone. His whole body lurched sideways. There was a sickening crunch, a sharp intake of breath, and then a cry of pain as he crashed hard to the ground. The sharp edge of a rock had torn open a long, ugly gash along his ankle. Blood began to gush instantly, stark and red against his pale skin. Out of an instinct born of 40 years of conditioning, my hand twitched forward to help him. It was a phantom limb of my old self, reaching out. But just before my fingers could brush his sleeve, I jerked it back as if from a flame. In my past life, that one gesture, that single act of help, had tied me to him in 40 years of bitter entanglement. It had been the start of it all. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with pain and something else. Something that looked like profound, utter disbelief as he saw my hand retreat. I stepped back twice, creating more distance between us, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. "Wait here," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I'll go get Clara." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and headed down the mountain at a brisk, efficient pace, my mind clear. This was not my problem. This was her responsibility. By the time we hurried back, Clara fussing and fretting beside me, Julian's face was already pale, beaded with sweat. His eyes lit up when he saw Clara, a pathetic flicker of hope, but dimmed the instant he caught sight of me behind her, standing apart, an unmoved observer. Clara, unwilling to let me steal the spotlight even in a moment of crisis, quickly and clumsily dressed his wound with a strip of cloth from her own kit and got ready to help him down the mountain. Julian leaned heavily on her shoulder, but his gaze stayed fixed on me, a silent, pleading question in his eyes. "Squad leader Alina," he said, his voice weak, "aren't you coming too?" If it had been the old me, I would have rushed to his side in a panic, desperate to follow him to the hospital, my own heart aching in sympathy, terrified something might happen to him. But ever since I decided to let him go, I found there wasn't even a shred of worry or tenderness left in my heart for him. The well was dry. I shook my head, my expression neutral. "I have to stay with the unit. Clara can take care of you." There was something in his eyes then that I couldn't decipher, a flash of hurt, of betrayal, but I didn't let it concern me. I urged Clara to hurry and take him to the hospital, then watched as they began their slow, painful descent, two figures leaning on each other, bound together by this accident. A small, cold smile touched my lips. Let them have each other. By the time I got back to camp, the sky was already dark, the stars beginning to pepper the velvet expanse. Maya, who had returned earlier, was squatting by the dormitory door, looking around anxiously. The moment she saw me, she jumped up. "Alina, let me tell you, Julian's injury is all over the company now. They're saying you stood by and didn't help him." I took a long drink from my canteen, the water cool and cleansing. "So what? Let them talk." Maya rubbed her hands nervously, her eyes wide with concern. "But they say you avoided him on purpose just so Clara could be the one to shine." I almost spit out my drink. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "What nonsense." "Actually," Maya said quickly, her expression shifting, "the troupe is praising you now, saying you're so magnanimous, letting Clara have her moment. Even the captain said you deserve to be commended for your level-headedness and dedication to the unit." I lowered my canteen and suddenly laughed, a real hearty laugh that came from deep within my belly. It felt good. Perfect. Last life I was nothing but a lovesick fool. This time I've managed to come off like I've got class. The path ahead was becoming clearer. I just had to walk it alone. And for the first time in either of my lives, the thought of walking alone felt like a victory, not a defeat. Julian's injury wasn't serious, but he still ended up staying in the hospital for 2 days. On the day the troupe organized a visit, I deliberately walked at the very end, a ghost on the periphery of my own past. The ward was already piled high with gifts and get-well-soon cards. He sat on the bed, his ankle wrapped in pristine white gauze, looking more bored than in any real danger. Several senior members of the troupe surrounded him, fussing over him from every angle, their voices a symphony of false concern. I stood at the back of the crowd, nodding perfunctorily like an outsider, my mind already on the physics textbook waiting for me back in the dorm. When the greetings were about done, the captain signaled it was time to leave. A wave of relief washed over me. I turned, ready to melt back into the hallway with the others. "Squad leader Alina." Julian's voice cut through the chatter, surprisingly clear and firm. "Can I have a word with you? Alone." The room fell into an instant, prickly silence. Maya shot me a look, her eyebrows nearly reaching her hairline, while the others quietly filed out, their curious glances bouncing between Julian and me. When the door clicked shut, the air in the room became thick and difficult to breathe. Julian pulled a letter from under his pillow, his fingers fidgeting nervously along the edges of the envelope. "Your mom," he said softly, his voice unsteady. "She wrote to me." My heart lurched. How could I have forgotten? My mother had always been especially fond of him, writing to him constantly, her words brimming with not-so-subtle hints about marriage and a shared future. Back then I'd been all too happy to encourage it, even teasing him with the letters, mistaking his flustered, forced responses for shyness. Now looking back, it felt utterly, cringingly ridiculous. "You don't need to worry about her," I said, my tone flat and final. "I'll explain everything to my mom later. She won't bother you anymore." Julian's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a disbelief that was starting to become a familiar fixture on his face. "No, that's not what I meant, Alina." He leaned forward, the letter crumpling in his grip. "Did I do something wrong? Did I upset you? Why have you been so cold toward me lately?" I froze, staring at him. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the question left me momentarily speechless. In my last life, I had poured my heart and soul into him, a bottomless well of devotion, and he had never once taken me seriously, had never once looked at me with anything resembling the desperation I saw in his eyes now. Now that I was the one drawing the line, he suddenly looked wounded, lost. I stared at him, this man-boy who had been the sun around which my entire world had revolved, and I couldn't help asking the question that had haunted me for a lifetime. "Then what exactly do you want from me, Julian?" His lips trembled, opening and closing like a fish out of water, but he couldn't give me any clear answer. He just looked at me, confused and hurt. I sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of 2 lifetimes. "You hated me clinging to you. I know that. So I've stopped. Just as you wished. So don't keep pressing me for explanations." "Alina, that's not..." he started, his voice thick with an emotion I refused to name. But before he could finish, the tense atmosphere was shattered by the door swinging open. Clara walked in, a thermos of hot water in her hand, her entrance staged like a leading lady's. The moment she saw me, her face darkened, her pretty features twisting into a scowl. "Why are you still here?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a whip. I couldn't be bothered to argue to justify my presence. I was done with this stage, these players. I turned and walked toward the door, my steps measured and sure. Alina, wait. Julian called after me, a sudden raw urgency in his voice that I'd never heard before, not even in the most dramatic of his performances. I pretended not to hear and strode out, the sterile hospital smell giving way to the fresh, open air. As I stepped through the hospital gates, I glanced back, a morbid curiosity getting the better of me. He was there, leaning against the windowsill, watching in my direction. From that distance I couldn't make out his expression, but the posture, the intense focus, reminded me uncannily of the way he had once watched Clara leave in my past life. The memory sent a chill entirely devoid of warmth down my spine. Shaking my head, I quickened my pace, leaving the hospital and its ghosts behind. Whatever his reaction, it no longer mattered to me. I had finally understood. Some people, the more you hold them up, the less they value you. The only way to win was not to play. I tried to avoid Julian, but lately he had been acting strangely, a persistent shadow I couldn't shake. Ever since we got back from the hospital, he began showing up in front of me with a frequency that was bordering on obsessive. After the performing arts troupe finished rehearsals, he would deliberately take the long way past our regiment, clutching an enamel lunchbox in his hands like a sacred offering. He stood at the edge of the training ground one afternoon, the sun bleaching his uniform a brilliant white. Alina, he called out, his voice tentative. Our troop has a new program. Do you want to come watch? I was leading new recruits in formation, my voice barking commands. I didn't even turn my head. No time. Another day he intercepted me on the path to the mess hall. I've been cooking lately, learning some new dishes. Maybe you'd like to try. No need, I cut him off flatly. The meals in the regiment are fine. His steps faltered. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of him standing there awkwardly, the lunchbox in his hands shifting as if he didn't know what to do with it. His expression even carried a trace of genuine grievance. In my last life, seeing him like that would have made my heart ache, and I would have agreed to anything he asked just to smooth that look from his face. But now I couldn't even be bothered to give him a proper glance. His disappointment was his own to manage. After training ended one evening, Julian blocked the path back to the dorm again. He tried to act casual, leaning against a tree, but it was obvious he was deliberately fishing for my plans. The moonlight fell across his face, making his already handsome features look even more striking, sculpting them into the very image I used to love most about him. Alina, he began, his voice soft, I heard you're giving up the college entrance exam and want to stay here at the grassroots level. I answered lightly, not breaking my stride. I've made my decision. I've decided to stay here too, he added quickly, his eyes curving with a smile that didn't reach them. I think you're right. The grassroots need young people like us. I almost laughed out loud. The hypocrisy was staggering. In my last life he had done everything possible to escape to the provincial capital, to a life of more comfort and prestige. If he hadn't failed the exam he would have run long ago, and now he was talking about staying here, about my ideals as if they were his own. Still, I didn't expose him. There was no point. I simply nodded, a non-committal gesture, and started to walk around him. Julian had always been proud and full of ambition. After reaching out to me several times and getting nothing but polite, firm rejection, his pride must have been stung. As I brushed past him, he suddenly called out loudly, using my full name with a desperate intensity. Alina Chin. I turned my head, one eyebrow raised in silent question. What's wrong with you? He demanded, his voice cracking. Nothing, I said, my voice calm, a flat lake to his turbulent sea. I thought I'd made everything clear to you at the hospital. As for the rest, I have nothing more to say. With that, I walked away without looking back, leaving him standing alone in the moonlight, a statue of confusion and wounded pride. When I returned to the dorm, Maya was cracking sunflower seeds while reading the newspaper. I walked to my bunk and tore a page from the calendar hanging there. The date stared back at me, a silent deadline. Maya, I asked, my voice deliberately casual, when's the deadline for filling out college applications? The day after tomorrow, I think, she said, puzzled. Then her eyes widened, the sunflower seeds forgotten in her hand. Alina, wait. You've changed your mind, haven't you? I didn't stop to answer. A sudden, fierce determination had taken hold of me. Grabbing my jacket, I ran out of the dorm, my heart hammering against my ribs not from exertion, but from a sudden, clarifying purpose. I caught the education clerk, young Leo, just as he was about to lock the office door for the night. "Leo," I said, slightly breathless, "give me another application form." He looked stunned, but he handed me the sheet without question. I didn't wait. I leaned on the windowsill in the hallway, the fading evening light my lamp, and filled it out right there and then. My pen moved with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. On the first choice line I wrote in clear, bold letters, "Tsinghua University, Department of Mechanical Engineering." Leo's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "Squad leader, are you crazy? You think you can get in?" I signed my name with a flourish, the Inca declaration of war on my past. "If I don't try," I said, meeting his shocked gaze, "how will I ever know?" By the time I handed in the form, the sky had gone fully dark, the first stars winking into existence. I strolled back slowly toward the dorm, the weight of the decision a comforting anchor. Only to spot Julian still standing under the street lamp in the distance. The lunchbox he'd been carrying was gone. When he saw me, his eyes lit up and he started toward me, a hopeful expression on his face. I immediately turned down another path and cut back through the training ground, the cold, hard earth solid beneath my feet. I would not be detoured. Inside, Maya was poring over the review materials I had secretly gathered, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Alina, you're really going for it? Wow, you've kept quiet all this time, then suddenly come out swinging." I didn't answer. I just sat down, opened my physics textbook, and let the complex dance of numbers and theories swallow me whole. I knew the road would be hard. I'd have to work 100 times harder than others just to have a chance. But a chance was still a chance. Without taking this step, it would never be possible. Besides, I thought back to what Julian had said, how he wanted to stay here. Fine, I thought, a steely resolve settling in my soul. Then I will test out. I will leave. I will put real, undeniable distance between us. I refuse to let the tragedies of my past life repeat. I would not be a supporting character in his story anymore. Suddenly, footsteps sounded outside the window, followed by a soft, hesitant knock on the door. Maya and I exchanged a glance, but we stayed still, silent, two statues in the lamplit room. After a long, tense while, the footsteps faded into the distance. I pushed open the window and saw a figure under the street lamp, walking farther and farther away until he was swallowed by the night. I quietly shut the window, the click of the latch a final sound. I turned another page of my book, the sound loud in the quiet room, and told myself, this time I must live for myself. When the captain heard I was applying for the exam, he clapped me on the shoulder, his broad face splitting into a wide, genuine smile. "Good girl. You've got ambition. If our regiment can produce a college student, that'll be a real honor." I scratched my head, feigning a shyness I didn't feel. "Thank you for the encouragement, Captain, but could you keep it quiet until the results come out? I don't want too many people to know." The truth was, I just wanted to keep it from Julian. His recent behavior was too unpredictable, too volatile. I didn't need his desperate energy clouding my focus. "Don't worry," the captain agreed readily, giving me a knowing wink. "But if you really get in, you'll owe me a meal." I laughed and promised him again and again, the simple negotiation feeling like a pact with a new future. When I left the captain's office, I was in a pretty good mood, the weight of my secret feeling like a promise rather than a burden. That mood lasted until I walked out of the building and spotted Julian sitting under the old locust tree, a splash of dappled shade in the afternoon sun. And he was knitting. Clumsily, his brow furrowed in concentration, a tangle of sky-blue yarn in his lap. I didn't even have to guess. It was obviously for Clara. Her favorite color. And there she was, buzzing around him like a persistent fly, her voice carrying across the quiet compound. "Julian, since when does a man like you knit sweaters? This pattern looks great. You made it for me, right? Blue suits me best." Julian didn't even lift his head, his bamboo needles moving slowly, painstakingly back and forth in his large, awkward hands. I was about to take a detour, to slip away unnoticed, when he suddenly looked up, his gaze somehow finding me instantly in the landscape. "Alina." He jumped to his feet so abruptly that his knitting needles clattered to the ground, the ball of yarn rolling away. Before I could react, he grabbed the half-finished sweater, a lumpy, misshapen thing, and rushed over, leaving a sputtering Clara behind. Clara's face instantly turned stormy, a thundercloud of jealousy and anger. I simply froze in place, too astonished to move. Julian grinned, a strained, nervous expression, and held the sweater against me as if to measure. Look, does it fit? I picked sky blue on purpose. It matches your skin. You look great in it. The gesture was so bizarre, so utterly out of character that I could only stare. Julian had never given me anything before, not a single thoughtful gift. Now he was offering me this testament to his desperation. I stepped back, instinctively creating space. The yarn, still connected to the ball on the ground, snagged on one of my uniform buttons, pulling a long loose strand with a faint pop. Julian. Clara stormed up, yanking hard on his sleeve. What do you mean by this? You made that sweater for me. Her voice was a shrill accusation. Julian's expression darkened instantly. He flung her hand off with a violence that surprised me. What business is it of yours? He barked, his voice loud in the quiet yard. Alina's family supported me so I could join the troop. She's given me so many gifts. What's wrong with me repaying her with a sweater? I wasn't the only one shocked into silence. Even Clara looked stunned, her mouth hanging open. It was the first time Julian had ever snapped at her, ever raised his voice to her in defense of me. Her face flushed a deep, mortified red. Didn't you say you hated her clinging to you? She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. And now you're rushing to knit her sweaters. When did I ever say that? Julian roared back, his handsome face contorted with a rage I'd only ever seen directed at me in my previous life. Clara, stop making things up. Their voices grew louder and louder, a vicious, public quarrel that echoed across the compound. My head began to throb, a dull ache behind my eyes. I stood there watching them tear into each other, their faces flushed with anger and humiliation, and all I could think was how pathetic it was. How utterly, pointlessly pathetic. In my last life, this scene, Julian defending me, fighting with Clara, would have been the culmination of all my dreams. I would have been ecstatic, floating on a cloud for weeks. But now it just felt cheap. Tawdry. A meaningless drama I wanted no part of. I turned to leave. The snagged yarn snapped with a sharp, final pop. Julian noticed me walking away and dropped the argument with Clara at once, as if she had ceased to exist. Alina, he called out, his voice pleading, once I finish the sweater I'll bring it to you. I waved my hand without looking back, a gesture of utter dismissal. Give it to Clara. I don't need it. His footsteps stopped dead behind me. From the distance, I heard Clara sneer with venomous satisfaction. Throwing yourself at someone who doesn't even care. Serves you right. I told you to give it to me. Shut up. Julian snapped, but his voice lacked its earlier force. I quickened my pace, turned the corner of the barracks, and left their shouting, their drama, their tangled mess of emotions behind me. They were welcome to each other. Out of nowhere, Maya popped up from behind a storage shed, her face alight with unabashed gossip. Squad leader, I saw everything just now. I shot her a glare that could have frozen fire. Saw what? Did you finish your review exercises? She shrank her neck, chastised, but her eyes still sparkled with the thrill of it all. But really, squad leader, she lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, you don't want that sweater? I've seen Julian working on it for several nights. His fingers are full of little cuts from the needles. My steps faltered for just a second. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, flashed before my eyes. Me in my last life, staying up late under a single dim bulb, painstakingly copying sheet music for him because he'd mentioned his was smudged. My fingers, blistered and bleeding from holding the pen for hours, only for him to take the freshly copied sheets and hand them straight to Clara the very next day without a second glance. Maybe this was a kind of karmic payback. A twisted, ironic reflection. But it brought me no satisfaction. Only a profound weariness. It's got nothing to do with me, I said flatly, my voice devoid of all emotion. Let's go review. We're wasting time. Maybe it was the strain of training and studying at the same time. Or maybe Julian showing up in front of me so often had worn down my mental defenses. But that night I actually dreamed of him. Not the desperate, pleading Julian of now, but the Julian of my past life. I dreamed I was just over 20, wearing a brand new military uniform, pacing uneasily in front of his family's simple home. Normally, it wasn't proper for the girl's side to bring up a marriage proposal, but I had loved him so much, been so terrified of losing him if I waited too long. So I had begged my mother to speak for me, hoping their family would be moved by all those years of our one-sided entanglement. Inside, I could hear my mother's voice, strained with forced cheerfulness, talking to Julian's cousin-in-law. Our Alina truly loves Julian. Through the crack in the door I saw him. He was sitting in the corner of the main room, staring blankly, lost in thought. That day he was wearing a light blue Dacron shirt that made his skin look even paler, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door, toward the path. I knew exactly who he was waiting for. It wasn't me. Julian, my mother had said, a smile plastered across her face. Alina has done so well in the regiment. He treats you well too. What do you think? Julian had lowered his head without a word, those fine lips of his pressed into a tight, stubborn line. I had seen this scene play out countless times. I had begged my aunts, my cousins' wives, nearly every relative I had, to come to his family to speak on my behalf. And every time he behaved exactly like this. Not nodding, not shaking his head. Just stalling. Trapping us all in his indecision. My noisy, desperate proposals had startled him and cornered Claire as well. She also wanted to marry him, but his family wouldn't agree. They looked down on her family for not being able to offer a proper dowry. So she went down a twisted path. In my dream I saw it again, clear as day. For the sake of getting an injury compensation payout from her workplace, Clara had screamed from a third-floor window before hurling herself down, breaking her leg in a calculated, desperate act. Her cry in my dream, a sound of both pain and triumph, jolted me awake. I shot upright in bed, fine beads of cold sweat covering my forehead and plastering my hair to my skin. Dawn hadn't broken yet, and the dorm was filled with the sounds of my comrades' steady, untroubled breathing. But the moment I closed my eyes, the images surged back, more vivid than reality. Julian sitting in the bridal chamber on our wedding night, his bright red groom's robe shredded by the scissors in his own hands. He pointed the sharp blade at me, his eyes wild, ready to die together. If not for you, he had spat, his voice raw with hatred, Clara wouldn't have scrambled to put together a dowry. She wouldn't have jumped. It's you who ruined the rest of her life. I had opened my mouth, but no words had come out. On my wedding night, my groom spat venom at me, looking at me as if I were his mortal enemy. The dream spun on, a relentless horror show. The day my daughter was born, I had labored in agony for a full day and night, nearly dying in the delivery room. When the nurse finally placed the wrinkled, mewling baby in my arms, my hands had trembled with a love so fierce it was painful. But later, when she began to learn her letters, the first word she wrote wasn't Dad or Mom. Julian had held her small hand, guiding it carefully across the paper to write the single character ing, Clara's name. His expression had been so tender, so full of a private, shared meaning, that it stabbed at my eyes even in the memory. This is your Aunt Lily's name, he had told our daughter, his voice soft. Remember it. Okay, I remember. But Daddy, who is Aunt Lily? In that instant Julian's face had softened, and he had spun her a romantic, tragic story of his and Clara's star-crossed love. He had even brought our daughter along to meet Clara after work. That day he had worn a new shirt, had even put on cologne. He stood there holding our daughter's hand on Clara's path home, the little girl clutching a bouquet of wildflowers he had doubtless helped her pick. At 10 years old, my daughter had flung herself joyfully into Clara's arms as though the three of them were the real family, the unit. And I was the outsider, the obstacle. I kept telling myself to endure, to be better, to be more patient, that eventually they would see my worth, they would come around. But in the end, when I was 60 and gravely ill in the hospital, Julian told the doctors straight out to stop treatment. He packed a few of my old clothes and sent me off to a nursing home to die. There, too weak to move, I lay on the thin, lumpy mattress and listened to the caretakers whisper in the hallway, their voices carrying clearly in the sterile silence. I heard Mr. Shin is getting married. Of course, he's been devoted to that teacher Clara for 40 years. Finally, it's paying off. His daughter is thrilled, running around helping with everything. The heart monitor had shrieked its final alarm. Staring at the water stain on the ceiling, my vision had blurred. The last thing I heard was the doctor's voice, flat and professional. Prepare the critical notice. Where's the family? No one had answered. Squad leader. Squad leader. Maya's voice, soft with concern, dragged me back to the present, to the dark dormitory, to my second chance. I realized my pillow was soaked through with tears I didn't remember shedding, and the coppery taste of old blood and regret coated my throat. She handed me a towel, her face pale in the pre-dawn gloom. "Bad dream," she whispered. I wiped my face, the rough cotton a welcome abrasion. Then I suddenly laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Not a dream," I corrected her, my voice raspy. "A revelation. It showed me the truth." I rolled out of bed, my body moving on an autopilot of pure resolve. I pulled my review materials from the drawer. My fingers were still trembling, but not from fear. From a cold, hard fury. "Maya," I said, my voice low and intense in the quiet room, "starting today I'm going to study all night. Every night." She stared at me in shock, her sleepiness gone. "What got into you?" I didn't answer. I grabbed my pen, the instrument of my liberation, and slashed a thick black line across the calendar, crossing out the number on the college exam countdown. The tearing sound of the pen cutting the paper was sharp, decisive. Brought back the snap from my dream, the sound of Julian snapping our wedding candles in two. In my last life I'd been a complete fool. I thought sincerity could earn sincerity in return. Yet even at my deathbed, not a single person had come to see me off. After a long silence, the only sound the scratching of my pen on paper, I suddenly blurted out, "Maya, do you know what the dumbest thing in the world is?" "What?" she asked, her voice small. "Falling into the same pit twice," I said, pressing my forehead against the cool, smooth page of my textbook. The words "final sprint for the college entrance exam" glared back at me in blood-red letters. If I make the same mistake again this life, my words cut off abruptly, because right then through the window I saw him. Julian was standing downstairs in the weak morning light, looking up at my window. His cheeks were wet, his tears glistening in the dawn, just like the red wax tears from the wedding candles he had broken so long ago. I felt nothing. No pity. No warmth. No connection. I yanked the curtains shut with such force that one of the metal hooks tore free from the fabric, clattering to the floor. To hell with his tears, I thought, turning my back to the window. Hadn't I shed enough in my last life? I opened my book. I had a future to study for. For a long time afterward, I kept my world small, a fortress of my own making. I shuttled only between the dormitory and the training ground, my head buried in textbooks or my body pushed to its physical limits. I left no space, no crack in my armor for Julian to intrude. He became a persistent ghost at the periphery of my life. A figure under a street lamp, a voice calling my name across the parade ground, a presence I felt but refused to acknowledge. My focus was a laser and its target was the day of the exam. The night before, sleep was a fickle stranger. The ghosts of my past and the anxieties of my future waged war in my mind. Before dawn, when the barracks were still cloaked in a deep, silent blue, I slipped out of the dorm with my bag on my back, heavy with pencils, ink, and a resolve forged in the fire of a previous life. Maya, a light sleeper, stirred. "I'll walk you out," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. I pushed her gently back onto her bunk. "Don't wake the others. I'll be back as soon as the exam's over." I needed to do this alone. This was my pilgrimage. Just as I reached the main gate, the first hints of pink staining the eastern sky, I heard the hurried footsteps I had dreaded. My heart sank, a cold stone in my chest. Sure enough, Julian's voice rang out, cutting through the morning chill. "Alina." He jogged up, his jacket half on, his hair disheveled as if he'd thrown his clothes on in a panic. In the weak morning light, his eyes shone with an unnaturally bright, feverish intensity. Panting, he asked, "Why are you leaving so early? I can take you later." He gestured vaguely toward the bicycle sheds. "It's fine," I said casually, adjusting the strap of my bag. "Just going into town for a bit. I'll be back soon." His eyes darted over my bag, my determined posture. "In such a rush," he murmured. He suddenly reached out, tugged my backpack strap, and before I could stop him, shoved 2 warm, steamed buns inside. The gesture was so domestic, so utterly misplaced. "Then be careful. Come back early." I didn't respond. I didn't thank him. I just turned and left, feeling the weight of the buns in my bag like a pair of accusing eyes. When I looked back from a distance, he was still standing there, a lonely silhouette against the waking barracks, waving hard as if seeing off a loved one to war. The test site was set up at the county school, a place buzzing with a nervous energy I found strangely familiar. I went a day early, found a cheap guest house, and spent the night tossing and turning, my mind racing through formulas and literary quotes. Finally, I gave up on sleep, got up and did one last practice test under the single bare bulb, the shadows long and dancing on the wall. The exam itself was a blur of intense concentration. 3 grueling days of pouring everything I had learned in 2 lifetimes onto paper. When it was over, a profound exhaustion settled over me, but it was a clean exhaustion, devoid of regret. I had done my absolute best. I returned to the regiment feeling hollowed out and light at the same time. As expected, Julian was the first to come running, his face a mask of eager concern. "Alina, did you finish your errands?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for a clue. I sidestepped him, my body moving on autopilot toward the blessed silence of the dorm. "I'm tired, Julian." He trotted after me, undeterred. "The troop has a show next week. I saved you the best seat." "I don't have time," I cut him off without looking back. That kind of exchange repeated endlessly over the following weeks. He was a moth to my flame, a flame that offered no warmth. He kept finding excuses to come near me, bringing fruit he claimed were extras from the troop, asking about my training schedule with a feigned interest, borrowing books he had no intention of reading. I brushed him off with the shortest answers possible, treating him with a polite, impersonal detachment that was a mirror image of how he had once treated me. The irony was not lost on me, but it brought no pleasure, only a weary sense of closure. Then one afternoon, as I was leading cool-down exercises after a brutal training session, the entire regiment erupted in chaos. Maya came sprinting onto the training ground, her face flushed, her voice shaking so hard she could barely form the words. She was waving a thick, official-looking envelope above her head like a victory flag. "Squad leader. Lena. It's here. It's your admission letter." The world seemed to slow down. The barks of the drill sergeants faded. The grunts and complaints of the recruits stilled. All eyes turned to me. Maya skidded to a halt in front of me, thrusting the envelope into my hands. It was heavy. The return address was stamped in bold, black ink. Tsinghua University, Beijing. My fingers trembled as I took it. I didn't need to open it. The weight, the official seal, said everything. A roar of cheers broke out around me. My squad, my comrades, swarmed me, their faces split with grins. "Squad leader, you're amazing. You actually did it. You've got to treat us to a feast." Hands clapped me on the back, ruffled my hair. For a moment I let the joy, their genuine pride, wash over me. This was my victory, but it felt like it was theirs too. "What's all the excitement?" The voice, familiar and unwelcome, cut through the celebration like a shard of ice. Suddenly Julian was there, pushing through the crowd, a bemused smile on his face. "What are you?" His words stopped short when he saw the envelope in my hands. The smile froze, then shattered. His eyes scanned the return address and I watched the understanding dawn on his face, slow and terrible. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale and waxy. "An admission letter?" he whispered. I nodded and carefully, deliberately, tucked the precious document into the inner pocket of my jacket, close to my heart. His eyes seemed to burn, the unnatural brightness returning with a vengeance. Step by step he came closer, the crowd instinctively parting for him, the festive mood evaporating. "So that day," he said, his voice low and trembling. "That day when you said you were going to town, you were really taking the college exam." I stayed silent. I didn't answer him directly, but my silence, my calm, unflinching gaze, was as good as an admission. His composure broke. His tears, which I had seen so often lately, spilled over in an instant, but this time they were not quiet tears of grief. They were tears of rage, of betrayal, his emotions shattering into 1,000 sharp pieces. "Why?" he choked out, the word a raw, wounded sound. "Why did you hide this from me, Alina Chin?" His voice rose, cracking with a hysterical edge. "Did I do something wrong? Why are you treating me so coldly now? And why do you have to go so far away?" The air around us was frighteningly still. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone was watching, staring at him in his public, humiliating hysterics. He stared at me, his face a mess of tears and desperation. "Don't tell me," he stammered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Was it just to avoid me?" I let out a calm sigh, the sound loud in the absolute silence. I looked at him, this man who had been the axis of my universe, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. There's no reason, Julian, I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the hushed training ground. I just don't like you anymore. I want to stay far away from you. His tears fell harder, great, heaving sobs that racked his frame. His lips trembled as he stammered, but I only wanted to stay at the grassroots. Because of you. The tears streamed down his face one after another, but I didn't move. I no longer felt the urge to reach up and wipe them away to soothe his pain. That part of me was dead and buried. There's no need to do anything for someone else, I said, my words final, absolute. If you want to stay, then stay. If you want to leave, then leave. Your life is your own. He clearly hadn't expected this. He had expected a fight, an explanation, perhaps even a relenting. He hadn't expected this utter, complete detachment. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, his eyes searching my face for some sign of the girl who had loved him so desperately. He found nothing. His face crumpled. Then he turned and bolted, pushing his way through the stunned crowd and running, stumbling, across the parade ground until he disappeared from view. I didn't chase after him. Not a single step. Some people are simply wrong for you. Better to cut ties from the very start. I turned back to my comrades, to Maya, who was watching me with a mixture of awe and concern. I managed a small, tired smile. Now, I said, about that feast. The spell was broken. The cheers slowly started up again, though more subdued now, tinged with the shock of what they had just witnessed. But I didn't care. It was over. As I had hoped, I walked through the grand gates of Tsinghua University a few weeks later, the admission letter no longer just paper but a key to a new world. But I never forgot my original dream, the simple, powerful calling I had felt on my return to life. During my years there, I studied hard, the complexities of mechanical engineering, a welcome challenge that occupied my mind fully. The ghost of my past life receded, becoming a faint, bad dream. And after graduation, I sent my resume back to our regiment. A few years later, I returned not as a lovesick girl, but as Officer Alina Chin, a woman with a degree from a top university and a heart finally, fully her own. The regiment looked the same stark barracks, the same dusty training grounds, the same smell of sweat, leather, and damp earth. But I was different. I walked through the gates with my head held high, my uniform bearing new insignia, my suitcase containing not desperate gifts, but engineering textbooks and plans for improved equipment. When Maya saw me, she let out a shriek that probably startled birds a mile away. She flung herself at me, clinging to me, her tears streaming down her face and soaking the shoulder of my new jacket. She was even more emotional than the day I'd left. Alina, you're really back. I thought you'd forget all about us once you were in the big city. I laughed, a free, easy sound, and patted her back. Stop crying. You'll embarrass us. I hoisted the bag I was carrying. I brought you all specialties from Beijing. Enough to feed the whole platoon. That night we gathered in the mess hall, a small group of my old comrades, the captain, now a major, beaming with paternal pride. We ate, drank, and laughed together until dawn, the easy camaraderie returning as if I had never left. The food was simple, the liquor rough, but the company was priceless. It felt like coming home. During the meal, as we were picking at the last of the food, the major leaned back in his chair, his face growing thoughtful. Alina, he began, his tone shifting slightly. I suppose you heard about Julian. The name landed on the table like a lead weight. The chatter around us died down. Maya shot me a worried look. I took a slow sip of my tea. No, I said calmly. I haven't. I've been focused on my studies. The major nodded, understanding. Well, he sighed. After you left, he was a mess for a while. Then he got it into his head to study too. Wanted to test into the same place as you, I think. He shook his head. But he lacked the talent or maybe the discipline. He tried several times but never made it. I said nothing, just continued to sip my tea, the warm liquid soothing. Eventually, the major continued, Clara, she said she wanted to marry him. At first he hadn't agreed. Held out for a long time. But when you never returned, never wrote, he gave up in despair, I suppose. Settled for it. I could picture it. Julian, proud and broken, and Clara, seeing her window of opportunity finally open wide. A match made not in heaven but in shared desperation. Their marriage, the major said, his voice dropping, turned out far from happy. From what I heard, Julian often blamed Clara, said that if she hadn't come between you two, you wouldn't have abandoned him in anger. I laughed softly then, a dry, mirthless sound. That excuse was all too familiar. It was always someone else's fault. Never his own choices, his own indecision, his own emotional cowardice. Later I heard they quarreled every day, the major went on. Loud, ugly fights. In a strict military unit, that kind of discord is a grave offense. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Both of them were expelled. A dishonorable discharge. Afterward they moved to some small county in the middle of nowhere. Lynn County, I think. No one knows what became of them after that. I filled my mouth with a piece of spiced beef, chewing slowly, savoring the flavor. Then I piled generous portions into the Major's and Maya's bowls, my movements deliberate, final. Enough, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. I looked around the table at the faces of my friends, my comrades. We finally reunited. Let's not ruin it by bringing up that nonsense tonight. I raised my glass, the rough ceramic cool against my fingers. Let's toast, I announced, my voice ringing clear in the hall. To my rebirth. To new beginnings. To us. A chorus of cheers echoed around the table, glasses clinking together, the somber mood banished as quickly as it had come. As for Julian and Clara, I left them firmly in the past, two ghosts in the county of my memory. They were a closed chapter, a lesson learned. From now on I was just Alina Chin. A soldier. An engineer. A woman who had faced death once and finally understood that loving anyone else would never, ever be as important as loving herself. The future was mine, and it was wide and it was bright. The weeks after my return settled into a new rhythm, one of purpose and quiet satisfaction. My official title was Regimental Engineering Officer, a role that had been created, I suspected, partly in my honor. My days were split between the training fields and the maintenance sheds, between the theoretical world of my education and the gritty reality of military hardware. I found a particular joy in the latter. There was a profound honesty in a malfunctioning engine, a stubborn gearbox. It didn't care about your past, your heartbreaks, your social standing. It either worked or it didn't, and the path to fixing it was one of logic, patience, and skilled hands. I would spend hours with the regiment's mechanics, my sleeves rolled up, grease smudging my cheeks as we tore down and rebuilt generators, tuned transport vehicles, and puzzled over erratic communications equipment. The men, initially wary of a university-educated officer, and a woman at that, soon warmed to me when they saw I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty and that I respected their practical, hard-won knowledge. It was during one of these sessions, wrestling with a bulky field radio, that a young private approached me holding a clipboard like a shield. "Officer Chin? There's a civilian here to see you. At the main gate." I wiped my hands on a rag, my mind still half occupied with circuit diagrams. "A civilian? Who?" "He said his name is Leo. Leo Wen. He said you'd know him." "Leo?" "The education clerk." Young Leo, who had stared at me in disbelief when I'd scrawled Tsinghua University on my application form. A smile touched my lips. "Send him in. He can find me here." Leo appeared a few minutes later, picking his way carefully through the organized chaos of the maintenance shed. He looked older, more filled out, the gawky youth replaced by a young man with a confident bearing, though his eyes still held that same earnest intelligence. "Officer Chin," he said, snapping a surprisingly crisp salute. I laughed. "None of that, Leo. It's just Alina. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I gestured to a relatively clean workbench and he leaned against it, looking around with open curiosity. "I heard you were back," he said. "I'm at the county education office now. When the news came down that you'd not only been accepted to Tsinghua but had graduated and returned, well, you've become a bit of a local legend." He grinned. "The girl who dared." "The girl who studied," I corrected him gently. "Exactly." He grew more serious. "That's actually why I'm here. We're trying to revitalize the adult education program in the county. A lot of the soldiers and even some of the younger officers, they have the drive but they lack the foundation. They need tutoring, guidance." He looked at me, his expression hopeful. "I was wondering if you might consider volunteering some of your time. To teach. To show them it's possible." The request took me by surprise. I had never considered myself a teacher. My focus had been so intensely on my own escape, my own survival. But as I looked at Leo's hopeful face and thought of the young soldiers I trained with every day, I felt a new kind of pull. This wasn't about escaping a past, it was about building a future. For them. For this place I had chosen to call home. I'm not a trained teacher, I said cautiously. You're the best qualified person in 100-mile radius, he countered. And you have something no textbook can give, you're one of them. They'll listen to you. I thought of the long, lonely nights of study, the mountain of books, the fear of failure. If I could smooth that path for someone else. All right, I said, the decision feeling right as I spoke it. I'll do it. We can start with mathematics and physics. Twice a week in the evenings. Leo's face broke into a brilliant smile. Thank you, Alina. This will mean so much. After he left, I stood for a moment in the quiet shed, the smell of oil and metal filling my lungs. A legend. A teacher. These were identities I had never imagined for myself. They were sturdier, more meaningful than being someone's wife, someone's obsession. They were built on my own merit. The classes began the following week, held in a spare classroom in the regimental schoolhouse. At first only a handful of soldiers showed up, shuffling in with a mixture of curiosity and embarrassment. But word spread quickly. Officer Chin explains things so you can actually understand them. The room was full. Young privates, grizzled sergeants, even a few junior officers. All of them with notebooks and a determined look in their eyes. One evening, after a particularly good session on mechanical advantage, a young soldier lingered after the others had filed out. He was maybe 19 with a farmer's strong hands and a shy demeanor. Officer Chin, he said, his voice quiet. My name is Jian. I want to try for the engineering corps entrance exam next year. Do you think I could? I looked at him, at the spark of ambition in his downcast eyes, and I saw a flicker of my own reflection from a lifetime ago. Not the desperate, love-starved girl, but the determined student leaning on the windowsill, filling out her form. I think, I said, my voice firm with conviction, that if you're willing to work for it, you can do anything. Let's make a study plan. The gratitude in his eyes was a reward greater than any praise from a superior officer. This was my legacy. Not a man, not a broken marriage, but this, the chance to ignite a spark in someone else. As I walked back to my quarters under a canopy of brilliant stars, I felt a peace so profound it was almost a physical presence. The ghosts were silent. The future was not just bright, it was useful. A year bled into 2 and my life at the regiment became as solid and real as the mountains that cradled it. The tutoring program flourished, with 2 of my students, including young Jian, passing their exams and securing placements in specialist training programs. My work in the engineering corps led to small but significant improvements in the regiment's operational efficiency. I had earned my place not through family connections or by being someone's shadow, but through the sheer, undeniable force of my own competence. Maya and I remained close, our friendship deepened by shared history and mutual respect. We rarely spoke of the past of Julian. He had become a cautionary tale, a name from a story that belonged to another person entirely. One crisp autumn day, I was tasked with inspecting a remote communications outpost near the border. It was a long drive in a jeep, the road a winding ribbon of dust carved through breathtaking rugged terrain. The outpost was little more than a concrete bunker and a forest of antennae, manned by a skeleton crew of 3 soldiers who were thrilled to have a visitor, especially one bearing news from the main regiment and a crate of fresh oranges. The inspection was routine. I checked the equipment, reviewed the logs, and shared a simple meal with the soldiers, listening to their stories of isolation and quiet vigilance. As I prepared to leave, the sergeant in charge, a man with a face like weathered leather, pointed to a narrow dirt track that branched off from the main road and disappeared into a steep valley. That road leads down to Lin County, he mentioned casually, spitting a sunflower seed hull into the dust. The name landed with a soft, distant thud in my memory. Lin County. The major had mentioned it. The place where Julian and Clara had disappeared. I felt a strange pull, not of curiosity but of a need for finality. A need to see with my own eyes the epilogue of that story, to confirm that the book was truly closed. Sergeant, I said, my voice even. I'd like to take a brief detour on my way back. An hour, no more. He nodded, not questioning the order of an officer. The jeep bounced and rattled down the treacherous track, descending into a valley that seemed forgotten by time. Lin County wasn't so much a town as a scattered collection of dilapidated farmhouses and a single dusty street with a few shuttered shops. It was a place of endings. I stopped the jeep at what passed for a general store, a dim, low-ceilinged room that smelled of dried fish and coal dust. An old woman with a face like a wrinkled walnut sat behind the counter, knitting. I bought a bottle of water. "Ma'am," I said, my tone polite. "I'm looking for some people who might have moved here a few years back." "A couple." His name was Julian. Hers was Clara. The old woman didn't look up from her knitting. Her needles clicked, a steady metronomic sound in the quiet shop. "The arguing couple," she said, her voice raspy, "lived in the oldly house on the edge of the village." She finally lifted her head, her eyes milky with cataracts, seeming to look right through me. "Gone. Gone," I repeated. "He drank," she said matter-of-factly. "Lost some job in the city. Came back meaner. He got sick. Cough that wouldn't quit. No money for a real doctor." She shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference born of seeing too much hardship. "She died last winter. He left a month later. Sold what little they had for liquor money, they say. No one knows where he went. No one cares to." She went back to her knitting, the conversation clearly over. I stood there for a moment, the cold bottle of water in my hand. There was no surge of victory, no pang of pity. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. This was the grand finale of the great tragic love story Julian had always believed in. A squalid death in a backwater county and a disappearance into the anonymous misery of a drunkard. It was so petty. So undramatic. So utterly, devastatingly small. I walked out of the store, the bright sunlight making me blink. I got back into the jeep and started the long, slow climb back up to the main road, leaving the valley of shadows behind. As I drove, the image of the old woman's indifferent face and the fate she had described settled in my mind. And with it came not sadness but a final, absolute sense of release. The last thread connecting me to that old life had been severed, not with a dramatic snap, but with a quiet, pathetic unraveling. I had spent my first life building a shrine to a man who was, at his core, weak and selfish. I had spent my second life tearing that shrine down and building a fortress of my own making. And now, I knew with unshakable certainty that the fortress would hold. I reached the main road and turned the jeep towards the regiment, towards my duties, my students, my friends. Towards a life I had built with my own two hands and the fierce, unbreakable will of a heart that had learned, finally, to beat for itself. The road ahead was clear. The past was not just behind me, it was ashes. And I was, at long last, free. The end.